The blood-soaked sunset painted the sky crimson as Lillian O'Connor stumbled through the gates of Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory. 1876, her tattered dress clinging to her bruised body, and a fierce determination blazing in her eyes that belied the terror lodged in her heart. Cheyenne had transformed in the decade since the Union Pacific Railroad made it a hub of activity. What once was a simple tent city now boasted proper wooden buildings, hotels, saloons, and businesses that served the steady stream of settlers, cowboys, and entrepreneurs seeking fortune in the West. The streets bustled with activity even as dusk approached, freight wagons rumbling past, cowboys fresh off the range looking for entertainment, and businessmen hurrying to complete their day's affairs. Lillian kept her head down as she passed a group of rowdy men exiting a saloon. Their laughter sent involuntary shivers down her spine, and she quickened her pace despite her exhaustion. She had traveled for days, catching rides on wagons when kind strangers offered, walking when they didn't. Her feet were blistered, her stomach empty, but the physical pain paled compared to the wounds that couldn't be seen. A cold wind swept down the dusty Main Street, and Lillian pulled her threadbare shawl tighter. She needed shelter and work, and quickly. The meager coins hidden in her boot wouldn't last long, and she refused to beg. She'd rather die than return to Denver to him. The Western Union Telegraph office was still lit, and Lillian remembered the advertisement she'd seen weeks ago in a Denver newspaper. Summoning her courage, she pushed open the door, the little bell announcing her arrival. A thin man with spectacles looked up from his desk. "We're closing soon, miss," he said, his voice not unkind. "I'm looking for work," Lillian said, standing as tall as her 5'4" frame would allow. "I can read and write, do figures. I saw an advertisement for help at the Lazy S Ranch." The man studied her for a moment, taking in her disheveled appearance but noting the proper way she spoke. "The Lazy S is about 5 miles outside of town. Old man Simmons died last month. His son Yates runs it now. They're still looking for a housekeeper far as I know." Hope fluttered in Lillian's chest. "How might I find it? North Road out of town, can't miss it." "But miss," he hesitated, "it's getting dark. Might be better to wait till morning." "There's a boarding house run by Widow Jensen 2 blocks east that's respectable and charges fare." Lillian nodded her thanks, though she knew her coins wouldn't stretch to a night's lodging. Instead, she found herself huddled in the shelter of the livery stable, hunger gnawing at her stomach as she tried to ignore the sweet smell of hay and the occasional snort of horses. "You can't sleep here, miss." Lillian startled awake, her hand instinctively going to the small knife hidden in her boot. A tall man stood before her, silhouetted against the early morning light. She scrambled backward, her heart pounding. "Easy now," the man said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "Just saying you can't sleep here. Town has ordinances." As her eyes adjusted, she could make out his features' strong jaw covered in light stubble, blue eyes that seemed to assess her without judgment, and a well-worn Stetson that had seen many seasons. He wasn't dressed like a lawman, but there was an authority to him that made Lillian wary. "I'm sorry," she managed, gathering her single bag. "I'll be on my way." "You looking for work?" he asked, surprising her. When she nodded, he continued, "Name's Yates Simmons. I run the Lazy S. Heard from Higgins at the telegraph office you might be headed my way." Lillian stared at him, caught between suspicion and hope. "I'm Lillian O'Connor. Can you cook, Miss O'Connor?" "Yes," she answered, though cooking was actually one of her poorer skills. "Can you mend clothes, keep books, tend a house?" He fired the questions rapidly. "Yes to all," she said with more confidence this time. She'd been maintaining ledgers for her father's store since she was 14. Yates studied her, his gaze lingering on the fading bruise at her temple that she tried to hide with her hair. His expression hardened momentarily before softening again. I need a housekeeper. Ranch hands need feeding, house needs keeping. Pay is $15 a month plus room and board. It's honest work, Miss O'Connor. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a place to hide. When do I begin? She asked. Now, he said simply, gesturing to a wagon loaded with supplies. I'm heading back once I finish at the mercantile. Within the hour, they were rolling out of Cheyenne. Lillian perched on the wagon seat beside Yates, keeping a careful distance between them. The countryside opened before them, rolling plains stretching toward distant mountains, the morning sun illuminating pockets of wildflowers among the prairie grass. It's beautiful, Lillian murmured, almost to herself. That it is, Yates replied, his eyes scanning the horizon with obvious pride. My father claimed this land 20 years ago, started with nothing but a tent and a dream. There was sorrow in his voice when he mentioned his father, but also determination. They traveled in relative silence after that, Yates occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing brief bits of local history. Lillian answered his few direct questions with polite brevity, volunteering nothing about her past. The Lazy S came into view just as the sun reached its peak, a sprawling ranch house built of solid timber, several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. Men on horseback worked cattle in a distant field, and smoke rose from the house's stone chimney. Home, Yates said, guiding the horses toward the main house. A gray-haired woman emerged onto the porch as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. Relief washed over her weathered face at the sight of Lillian. Thank the Lord, she called out. You found help, Mrs. Abernathy. This is Miss O'Connor, Yates said as he halted the wagon. She'll be taking over as housekeeper. Bless you, child, Mrs. Abernathy said to Lillian. I've been trying to manage since Mrs. Simmons passed 2 years ago, but these old bones can't keep up with 12 hungry ranch hands anymore. Yates helped Lillian down from the wagon, his touch brief but firm on her elbow. She flinched slightly but recovered quickly, forcing a smile. Mrs. Abernathy will show you around, Yates said, already turning to unload supplies. Dinner's at 6. Men come in hungry. The next hours were a whirlwind as Mrs. Abernathy Martha, as she insisted Lillian call her, showed her through the surprisingly spacious and well-maintained house. There was a large kitchen with a cast iron stove, a dining room that could accommodate all the ranch hands, a comfortable parlor, and upstairs, several bedrooms including a small but clean room that would be Lillian's own. It's not much, Martha said apologetically as Lillian set her worn bag on the simple bed, but it's private. Lillian ran her fingers over the patchwork quilt, emotion tightening her throat. It's perfect, she whispered. A room with a door that locked. A window that looked out over endless prairie rather than a Denver alleyway. Safety, or at least the illusion of it. By 6 o'clock, Lillian had helped Martha prepare a hearty stew with the last of the winter's preserved vegetables and fresh beef. Fresh bread filled the kitchen with its comforting aroma, and Lillian found herself relaxing slightly as she worked. The peace shattered at the sound of male voices and boots stomping on the porch. The ranch hands filed in, a dozen men of varying ages, all sun-weathered and trail-worn. They eyed Lillian with undisguised curiosity as they took their places at the long table. Yates entered last, having cleaned up, his dark hair still damp at the temples. Miss O'Connor will be taking over household duties, he announced. You'll treat her with the same respect you'd show my mother. God rest her soul. The men nodded, a chorus of yes, boss, and welcome, miss, filling the room. Lillian nodded acknowledgement but kept her eyes downcast as she helped Martha serve the food. Only when everyone was settled did Yates gesture to an empty chair beside him. "Sit, Miss O'Connor. You've earned your place at this table." The meal proceeded with the usual rough camaraderie of men who worked together daily. They were careful with their language in her presence, and no one made untoward comments, but Lillian remained tense, eating little despite her hunger, after dinner, as the men dispersed to evening chores or relaxation. Yates lingered in the kitchen as Lillian cleaned up. "You don't need to do all that tonight," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "You've had a long day." "I prefer to finish what I start," she replied, scrubbing a pot with unnecessary vigor. Yates watched her for a moment, then said softly, "You're safe here, Miss O'Connor." Her hands stilled in the soapy water. She didn't look up. "No one is ever truly safe, Mr. Simmons." "Yates," he corrected. "And in my house, under my protection, you are." Lillian finally met his gaze, her green eyes challenging despite the fear that lurked beneath. "I've heard such promises before." Something flashed in his eyes, understanding perhaps, or anger not directed at her. "Whoever hurt you isn't welcome on Lazy S land." "There are many who have hurt me, Mr. Simmons, too many to count or name." The admission slipped out before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted her candor. Yates straightened, his expression serious. "I can't undo what's been done to you, Miss O'Connor, but I can promise you this. As long as you're here, no one will raise a hand to you again." "Pretty words," Lillian replied, turning back to her dishes. "Not words, Miss O'Connor. A vow." With that, he left her alone with her thoughts and the quiet splash of dishwater. That night, despite her exhaustion, Lillian slept fitfully. The bed was more comfortable than any she'd had in years, but old habits died hard. She woke at every creak of the house settling, every distant howl of a coyote, her mind racing with possibilities of danger. By dawn, she was already in the kitchen, stoking the fire and preparing breakfast. Cooking had never been her forte, but she was determined to earn her keep. Martha arrived shortly after, surprised to find Lillian hard at work. "Child, you didn't need to be up so early," she chided gently. "I'm used to rising with the sun," Lillian replied, not mentioning that she'd barely slept. The ranch's routine quickly became apparent. The men rose before dawn, had a hearty breakfast, and worked until midday when they returned for dinner, the main meal of the day. Supper was lighter, served in the early evening after the day's work was done. In between, Lillian cleaned, baked, mended clothes, and assisted Martha with whatever needed doing. Yates was often gone, riding out with the men or handling business in town, but when he was present, Lillian was acutely aware of him. He never approached her too closely, never raised his voice, and always spoke to her with respect, but she remained wary. A week passed, then two. Martha, who came daily from her small cabin near the main house but returned home each evening, became a trusted companion. The old woman never pried, but her kind presence was a balm to Lillian's wounded spirit. "You're doing well," Martha told her one afternoon as they hung laundry on lines strung behind the house. "The men say the food's better than it's been in years." Lillian smiled slightly. "That's because you're teaching me your secrets." "Oh, not all of them," Martha winked. "Got to keep some mystery about me." As they worked, Lillian noticed Yates returning with several of the hands. They were driving a small herd of horses, wild mustangs by the look of them, into one of the corrals. Despite herself, she paused to watch. Yates sat his own mount with easy grace, directing the other riders with economical hand signals. The mustangs, beautiful in their wildness, circled the corral nervously, dust rising from their hooves. "He's got away with horses," Martha commented, following Lillian's gaze. "Especially the wild ones, patient, Never breaks their spirit, just convinces them that working with him is better than fighting against him. Lillian turned back to the laundry. Men are different with animals than they are with women. Martha gave her a sharp look. Some men, yes. Not Yates Simmons. His father raised him right, and his mother, God rest her, she was a force of nature. No man raised under Caroline Simmons's roof would ever mistreat a woman. Lillian said nothing, but doubt was clear on her face. That evening, Yates sought her out as she sat on the back porch, taking a rare moment of rest after the day's work. "Miss O'Connor," he said, removing his hat as he approached, "mind if I join you?" She tensed but nodded, shifting slightly to make room on the bench. He sat, leaving ample space between them, and gazed out at the sunset painting the plains in gold and crimson. "You've been here almost a month," he observed. "Are you finding everything satisfactory?" "Yes, thank you," she replied formally. "Mrs. Abernathy has been very helpful. The men have nothing but praise for your cooking and the way you've set the house to rights." He glanced at her. "But you still look ready to bolt at any moment." Lillian's hands twisted in her lap. "Old habits." Yates nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Miss O'Connor, Lillian, I don't mean to pry, but it would help me keep my promise if I knew what or who you're running from." The direct question startled her. Most people pretended not to notice her scars, both visible and invisible. "Why would you want to know such things?" "Because threats are easier to counter when you can see them coming," he replied honestly. Lillian looked away, toward the distant mountains turning purple in the fading light. "His name is Theodore Blackwell," she finally said, the name bitter on her tongue. "He's a businessman in Denver, respectable they call him, a pillar of the community." Yates waited patiently as she gathered her thoughts. "My father owned a bookshop," she continued, her voice distant. "When he died 3 years ago, there were debts I didn't know about. Mr. Blackwell offered to help a loan with favorable terms, he said. When I couldn't make the payments, he offered me another arrangement." Her voice hardened. "I became his mistress. At first he was charming, generous even. Then his true nature emerged." Her fingers unconsciously traced the faint scar along her jawline. "He has friends in Denver, powerful men. When I tried to leave the first time, the sheriff himself brought me back, said I'd stolen from Mr. Blackwell. The second time, I made it as far as Colorado Springs before his men found me." Yates's hands had clenched into fists, but his voice remained calm. "And this time I was smarter," Lillian said with a hint of pride. "I planned for months, saved every penny I could hide away. Changed my appearance. Took a different name, O'Connor was my mother's maiden name, traveled mostly at night, never in a straight line." She finally looked at him, challenge in her gaze. "He'll still be looking. Men like Theodore Blackwell don't let go of what they consider their property." "You're not property," Yates said, an edge to his voice she hadn't heard before. "You're a person deserving of dignity and respect." "I know that," Lillian replied, surprising herself with her conviction. "That's why I ran." They sat in silence for a long moment, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "I was abused by men before," she finally warned, her voice barely audible. "I don't trust easily." Yates turned to face her fully, his expression solemn. "Then let me show you better ones exist." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Not a demand, not even really a promise, just a statement of intent. Lillian studied his face in the fading light, looking for signs of deception or ulterior motives. She found only sincerity and a quiet determination that matched her own. "I should finish the mending," she said finally, rising to her feet. Yates stood as well, keeping his distance. "Of course. Thank you for your honesty, Miss O'Connor." As she reached the door, he added softly, "We all have pasts that haunt us. The difference is in how we face our futures." The following day brought unexpected excitement to the Lazy S. A telegram arrived from Cheyenne, carried by a young ranch hand who'd been sent to town for supplies. Yates waited in the yard, his expression darkening before he strode into the house, calling for Lillian. She emerged from the pantry, flour dusting her apron, alarm rising at his urgent tone. "Miss O'Connor," he said, lowering his voice as he approached, "I've received word that men fitting the description of Blackwell's associates have been asking questions in Cheyenne." The blood drained from Lillian's face. "How did they? Doesn't matter," Yates cut her off. "What matters is keeping you safe. I need to ride into town, speak with the sheriff. Will you be all right here with Martha and the hands?" Lillian straightened her spine. "I'm not helpless, Mr. Simmons." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Never thought you were." He hesitated, then added, "If anything happens, anything at all, Foreman Tom Jenkins has instructions. The root cellar behind the smokehouse has a hidden compartment. Martha knows where." With that cryptic instruction, he was gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading as he galloped toward Cheyenne. Lillian tried to continue her work, but anxiety made her movements clumsy. Martha noticed but said nothing, simply working alongside her with quiet efficiency. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a spring storm. The ranch hands began returning earlier than usual, securing livestock and equipment before the weather hit. Lillian was setting bread to rise when the first rumble of thunder shook the windows. Martha glanced outside at the rapidly darkening sky. "That's coming in fast," she observed. "I should get home before it hits." "You could stay here," Lillian offered, sudden nervousness gripping her at the thought of being alone in the house. Martha shook her head. "My rheumatism tells me this one's gonna be a gully washer. I'd rather be in my own bed." She patted Lillian's hand. "You'll be fine. The men are all close by and Yates should be back any time now." But as the storm descended in full fury, there was still no sign of Yates. Lillian served supper to the hands, who ate quickly and returned to their bunkhouse, leaving her alone in the suddenly too large house. The wind howled around the eaves, rain lashing against the windows like thrown pebbles. Lillian moved through the rooms, securing shutters and checking that all was in order. She tried not to let her imagination run wild, but every crash of thunder made her jump, and the shadows seemed to take on menacing shapes. She was just banking the kitchen fire for the night when a pounding at the front door nearly stopped her heart. For a moment, she stood frozen, the poker clutched in her hand like a weapon. The pounding came again, more insistent. Taking a deep breath, Lillian moved cautiously toward the door, the poker still gripped tightly. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "Miss O'Connor, it's Sheriff Madison from Cheyenne. I've come with Yates Simmons." Lillian pressed her ear to the door. The voice was unfamiliar, but he'd used Yates's name. Still, caution made her hesitate. "Where is Mr. Simmons?" she called. A different voice responded, Yates's, unmistakable despite sounding strained. "It's all right, Lillian, let us in. I've taken a fall." She unbolted the door and opened it to find Yates leaning heavily on a tall man wearing a sheriff's badge. Yates's left arm was wrapped in a makeshift sling, his face pale beneath his tan. "My horse spooked in the lightning," he explained as they entered, water streaming from their slickers. "Threw me into a ravine. Sheriff Madison happened along just after." Lillian hurried to help, leading them to the parlor where a fire still burned in the grate. "I'll get towels and hot water," she said, already moving toward the kitchen. When she returned, Yates had been settled in a chair near the fire, his wet coat removed to reveal a bloodied shirt beneath the sling. "Dislocated shoulder," the sheriff explained as Lillian handed him a towel. "Doc Peterson put it back in place, but it'll be painful for a while." He also took a gash to his ribs that needed stitching. "I'm fine," Yates insisted, though the lines of pain around his eyes belied his words. "Did you tell the sheriff what you told me, Lillian?" She hesitated, glancing at the lawman. "It's all right," Yates assured her. "Sheriff Madison is an old friend. I trust him with my life and yours." Sheriff Madison removed his hat, revealing graying hair and kind eyes that somehow didn't diminish his air of authority. "Mr. Simmons has informed me of your situation, Miss O'Connor. I've already sent telegrams to contacts in Denver. We'll get to the bottom of this Blackwell business." Lillian sank into a chair, relief and fear warring within her. "He's a powerful man with powerful friends." "So am I," the sheriff replied simply. "Wyoming Territory may be rough around the edges, but we take care of our own. And as far as I'm concerned, anyone under Yates Simmons's protection is one of ours." Thunder crashed outside, making the windows rattle. The sheriff glanced at the storm. "I'd best get back to town before this gets worse if you're settled." He looked to Yates. "You need anything else, Simmons?" "We'll manage," Yates replied. "Thanks, Joe." After the sheriff departed, Lillian helped Yates to his feet. "You should rest." "I can make up a bed down here if the stairs are too difficult." "I can manage the stairs," he insisted, but accepted her support as they made their slow way to the second floor. At his bedroom door, he paused. "I don't want you to worry, Lillian. Sheriff Madison is a good man. He'll help us." "Us?" she questioned, the word catching her attention. Yates met her gaze steadily. "Yes, us. Your problems became mine the moment you stepped foot on Lazy S land." Lillian didn't know how to respond to such a declaration. No one had stood beside her, not truly, since her father died. "You barely know me," she finally said. "I know enough," he replied simply. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be soon enough to make plans." But as Lillian lay in her bed that night, listening to the storm gradually subside, she knew that sleep would be elusive. She had revealed herself to Yates Simmons, had shared her darkest secret, and instead of dismissing her or using the information against her, he had placed himself squarely by her side. It terrified her almost as much as Theodore Blackwell himself. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to the Lazy S. With Yates injured, Lillian found herself taking on additional responsibilities. She began managing the household accounts, discovering a natural talent for bookkeeping that impressed even Yates. "You have a head for figures," he commented one evening as they sat at the dining table after the hands had retired, ledgers spread between them. "Better than mine, I'll admit." Lillian smiled slightly, pleased by the compliment. "My father taught me." He believed a woman should be able to manage her own affairs. "A wise man," Yates replied, wincing slightly as he shifted his still tender shoulder. "You're in pain," Lillian observed. "You should rest." "It's healing," he insisted, but allowed her to help him close the books and return them to his study. As April yielded to May, the prairie bloomed with wildflowers, and the ranch bustled with spring activities. Calves were born, fences mended after winter damage, and preparations made for the upcoming cattle drive to railheads further east. Yates's injury healed slowly but steadily, and Lillian found herself watching his recovery with perhaps more attention than was strictly proper. She noticed the way he favored his left side, how he gritted his teeth when he thought no one was looking, the determination with which he pushed himself to return to his duties. For his part, Yates seemed equally aware of Lillian. His eyes often sought her out across rooms, and he found reasons to engage her in conversation beyond ranch business. He never pushed or presumed, but there was a growing ease between them that Lillian couldn't deny. Sheriff Madison visited regularly, bringing news from Cheyenne and updates on his inquiries about Theodore Blackwell. The news was troubling. Blackwell had indeed sent men looking for Lillian, though they'd lost her trail in northern Colorado. "He's a slippery character," the sheriff reported one afternoon as he, Yates, and Lillian sat in the study. "Respectable on the surface, but there are rumors about his business practices and his treatment of women." "Not just rumors," Lillian said quietly, her hand unconsciously touching the faint scar along her jaw. Yates's expression darkened. "Have you found evidence we can use against him?" the sheriff sighed. "Not yet. The women who might testify are too afraid or have disappeared. His business associates won't talk, but I'm not giving up." After the sheriff left, Lillian stood by the window, watching his horse disappear down the road toward Cheyenne. "He won't stop looking for me," she said softly. "Perhaps I should move on, go further west." Yates moved to stand beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Running isn't the answer, Lillian, not anymore." She turned to face him. "What would you have me do? Wait for him to find me, to hurt more people in his pursuit?" "I would have you stand your ground," Yates replied, his voice firm but gentle. "With people who care about you standing beside you." "And who would that be?" she challenged, though she already knew the answer. "Me," he said simply. "The ranch hands who have come to respect you. Martha, who loves you like a daughter. Sheriff Madison, who believes in justice." He hesitated, then added softly, "You're not alone anymore, Lillian." Something shifted in her heart at his words, a crack in the wall she'd built around herself. Before she could respond, however, they were interrupted by the arrival of a ranch hand with news that required Yates's attention. The moment passed, but Lillian found herself thinking about it long afterward. Was it possible to stop running, to build a life here, despite the shadow of her past? The answer came sooner than she expected, and in the worst possible way. It was a brilliant June morning, the kind that made the whole world seem fresh and new. Lillian had risen early to bake bread, and was enjoying a rare moment of tranquility on the front porch, watching the sun climb over the eastern horizon, when the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. 3 riders were coming up the road to the ranch, not ranch hands who were already out working, but strangers. Something in their posture, the deliberate way they approached, sent a chill down Lillian's spine. She retreated inside, closing the door behind her. Yates was in the barn checking on a sick calf. She could call for him, but instinct told her there wasn't time. Instead, she went quickly to Yates's study, where she knew he kept a revolver in his desk. The weapon felt heavy and foreign in her hand, but she checked that it was loaded just as her father had taught her long ago. Then she returned to the front hall, positioning herself where she could see through the window beside the door. The riders stopped in the yard, dust settling around their horses' hooves. 2 were clearly hired muscle-large men with hard eyes and well-worn guns on their hips. The third, slightly older and impeccably dressed despite the rigors of travel, was instantly familiar: Theodore Blackwell. Lillian's blood turned to ice in her veins. How had he found her so quickly? Then she remembered Sheriff Madison's telegrams to Denver. Someone must have intercepted them or been paid to reveal their contents. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. "Lillian," called a smooth, cultured voice that still haunted her nightmares. "I know you're in there. It's time to come home, my dear." She backed away from the door, the revolver clutched in both hands to keep it from shaking. "Your little adventure has been amusing," Blackwell continued when she didn't answer, "but it's gone on long enough. You belong to me, remember? Our arrangement was quite clear." "There is no arrangement," Lillian called back, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I owe you nothing." A cold laugh from the other side of the door. "You owe me everything, my dear. Your father's debts, the clothes on your back, the very food you ate for 2 years, and I always collect what I'm owed." "Leave this property immediately," she demanded. "This is Lazy S land. You're trespassing." "Ah yes, your cowboy protector." The mockery in Blackwell's voice made her skin crawl. I'm afraid Mr. Simmons won't be joining us. My associates are seeing to that as we speak." Fear for Yates surged through her, momentarily overshadowing her own terror. Had they hurt him, killed him? The door handle rattled as Blackwell tested it, finding it locked. "Don't make this difficult, Lillian. You know how I dislike having to discipline you in front of others." The casual threat, so familiar from their time together, ignited something in Lillian that burned hotter than fear. Rage. Pure, clarifying rage at what this man had done to her, at what he had taken from her. "The only thing you'll get from me," she said through clenched teeth, "is a bullet if you try to enter this house." Silence from the other side of the door. "Then, you always were too spirited for your own good. Perhaps another approach is needed." The sound of splintering wood came next, not from the front door, but from somewhere at the back of the house. They were breaking in through the kitchen. Lillian backed toward the stairs, trying to think. She could hide, but they would find her eventually. She could try to run, but they had horses and guns and the advantage of numbers. Or she could fight. The decision crystallized in an instant. No more running. No more being a victim. If Theodore Blackwell wanted her, he would have to face the woman she had become, not the frightened girl he had manipulated and abused. She positioned herself at the top of the stairs, the revolver steady in her hands now. She had a clear view of both the front door and the hallway leading from the kitchen. Whoever came through first would face her. The kitchen door crashed open, followed by heavy footsteps. One of Blackwell's thugs appeared in the hallway, a brutal smile spreading across his face when he spotted her. "Got her, boss," he called, starting toward the stairs. Lillian aimed the revolver. "Stop right there." The man laughed. "You won't shoot, you haven't got the spine for it. Try me," she replied, her finger tightening on the trigger. Before either could act, the front door burst open with such force that it tore partially from its hinges. Yates Simmons stood in the doorway, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, his own revolver aimed squarely at Theodore Blackwell. "Get off my land," Yates growled, his voice deadly calm despite the rage evident in every line of his body. Blackwell turned slowly, seemingly unperturbed by the gun pointed at him. "Mr. Simmons, I presume. This is a private matter between myself and my property." He gestured dismissively toward Lillian. "I suggest you stay out of it." "Lillian O'Connor isn't property," Yates replied. "She's under my protection and you're trespassing." Blackwell sighed theatrically. How tediously predictable. The gallant cowboy riding to the rescue of the damsel in distress. His hand moved subtly toward his coat, where Lillian knew he kept a small derringer. "But you see, Mr. Simmons, the lady and I have a binding arrangement." "The only thing binding," Lillian called from the top of the stairs, drawing all eyes to her, "was the ropes you used when I displeased you, Theodore." Yates's expression hardened further at her words, but his aim never wavered. "You heard the lady. Your arrangement is over. Now you can leave peacefully, or you can leave in a pine box. Your choice." For a long moment, tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Then Blackwell smiled a cold, reptilian smile that Lillian knew all too well. "Very well," he said smoothly. "It seems I've been outmaneuvered for the moment. But remember this, Lillian, I am a patient man, and I always get what's mine in the end." "I was never yours," Lillian replied, her voice ringing with newfound conviction. Blackwell's smile never faltered, but something dangerous flashed in his eyes. He turned back to Yates. "We'll be going now, Mr. Simmons, but this isn't over." "For your sake, it had better be," Yates replied. He stepped aside, allowing Blackwell passage through the door, but kept his revolver trained on the man. As Blackwell passed, he murmured something to Yates that Lillian couldn't hear. Whatever it was made Yates's face darken with fury, but he maintained his composure. The thug who had entered through the kitchen backed away, hands slightly raised, following his employer out. Lillian descended the stairs cautiously, still holding Yates's revolver. Through the open door, they watched as the three men mounted their horses. Blackwell tipped his hat mockingly toward the house before turning his mount and riding away, his men following. Only when they had disappeared down the road did Yates lower his gun. He turned to Lillian, his eyes quickly scanning her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. She shook her head. "No, you're bleeding, though." She gestured to the cut above his eye. He touched it absently, wincing slightly. "It's nothing. One of them caught me by surprise in the barn. Won't happen again." Lillian set the revolver on a side table and approached him, her steps hesitant but determined. Without speaking, she took her handkerchief and gently dabbed at the blood on his forehead. He stood perfectly still, watching her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "Thank you," she said softly, "for coming when you did." "I heard voices from the barn," he explained. Recognized Blackwell's name. His jaw tightened. "I only wish I'd gotten here sooner." "You came," Lillian replied simply. "That's what matters." Their eyes met and held, something unspoken passing between them. For the first time, Lillian allowed herself to truly see Yates Simmons not as a potential threat, or even merely as her employer, but as a man who had proven himself worthy of her trust. The moment was broken by the arrival of several ranch hands who had heard the commotion and come to investigate. Yates stepped back, turning to give them instructions to watch the property and alert the sheriff about the unwelcome visitors. As normalcy slowly returned to the ranch, Lillian found her thoughts continually returning to that moment with Yates. Something fundamental had shifted between them, and perhaps within her as well. That evening, after the excitement had died down and the ranch hands had returned to their regular duties, Lillian found Yates on the back porch, staring out at the sunset. His profile was outlined against the golden light, strong and steady. "Sheriff Madison will be here tomorrow," he said without turning as she approached. He was already on his way when Tom Jenkins reached him with news of Blackwell's visit. Lillian moved to stand beside him at the railing. "Do you think Blackwell will come back?" Yates was silent for a moment, considering. "Men like that don't give up easily, but next time we'll be better prepared." Lillian repeated softly, testing the word. "You keep saying that." Now he did turn to look at her, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. "Because it's true. You're not alone in this fight, Lillian." She studied him, this man who had opened his home and offered his protection with no expectation of anything in return. "Why are you doing this?" "Taking such risks for someone you barely know." "I know enough," he replied, echoing his words from weeks before. He hesitated, then added, "My mother. She came from a situation not unlike yours. My father gave her sanctuary, then his name and his heart." A shadow crossed his face. "I was raised to believe that a man's worth is measured by how he treats those who are vulnerable. By that standard, Theodore Blackwell is no man at all." Lillian was struck by his honesty, by the quiet conviction in his voice. "Your parents sound like remarkable people." A small smile touched his lips. "They were. I think they would have liked your strength, your determination." They stood in comfortable silence as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky and the first stars appeared above the plains. "When I first came here," Lillian said finally, "I was just looking for a place to hide, to catch my breath before moving on." She turned to face him fully. "I never expected to find a place that might become home." Yates's expression softened. "The lazy S has a way of getting under your skin." "The land, the people." "Yes," she agreed. "The people most of all." Something in her tone made his breath catch. Carefully, giving her every opportunity to step away, he reached for her hand. His calloused fingers enfolded her smaller ones with gentle strength. "I want you to stay, Lillian," he said simply. "Not out of fear or necessity, but because you want to, because you might find happiness here." Her heart raced at his touch, at his words, but not from fear. For the first time in years, the fluttering in her chest was something sweeter, something hopeful. "I'd like that," she whispered. He lifted her hand slowly, telegraphing his intentions, and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The simple gesture held more tenderness than any touch she had known in years. "Then it's settled," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. "Now we just need to deal with Blackwell once and for all." The opportunity came sooner than either expected. Sheriff Madison arrived the following morning with news that Theodore Blackwell had taken rooms at the Cheyenne House Hotel in town. "He's making no secret of his presence," the sheriff reported as they gathered in Yates's study. "Even paid a call on Judge Wilson yesterday evening." Yates frowned. "Trying to establish legal grounds to reclaim Lillian," the sheriff nodded grimly. "Showing documentation of debts owed, talking about breach of contract. The judge isn't easily swayed, but Blackwell is persuasive and clearly used to getting his way." Lillian's hands trembled slightly in her lap. "What can we do? It would be his word against mine, and he has influence even here, it seems." "Not as much as he thinks," Sheriff Madison replied with a hint of satisfaction. "You see, I've been making my own inquiries. After our first conversation, I wrote to an old colleague in Denver, a former Pinkerton who now works privately. He's been gathering evidence about Blackwell's activities for weeks." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a thick envelope. "This arrived by special courier this morning. Sworn statements from 3 women who were in situations similar to yours, Miss O'Connor. Evidence of blackmail, fraud in his business dealings," and he glanced apologetically at Lillian. "Documented physical abuse." Hope blossomed in Lillian's chest. Enough to bring charges against him. "More than enough," the sheriff confirmed. "I've already spoken with the territorial prosecutor. They're preparing papers now." Yates leaned forward. "Blackwell won't go quietly. He'll have brought protection with him." "I'm counting on it," Sheriff Madison replied with a grim smile. "That's why I'd like your help, Yates. You and a few of your most trusted hands." The plan came together quickly. Blackwell was to be arrested that evening at the hotel, before he could be warned of the impending charges. Sheriff Madison would lead the arrest, backed by his deputies, Yates, and 3 of the lazy Estaquet's most capable ranch hands. "What about me?" Lillian asked as preparations were made. Yates and the sheriff exchanged looks. "It's too dangerous," Yates began, but Lillian cut him off. "I've faced Theodore Blackwell's cruelty for years," she said firmly. "I won't hide while others risk themselves on my behalf. I deserve to see justice done." After some discussion, it was agreed that Lillian would accompany them to town but remain at the sheriff's office during the arrest. She would be called upon only if necessary to identify Blackwell formally for the record. As dusk approached, Lillian found herself riding beside Yates on the road to Cheyenne. Her heart, both heavy with anxiety and light with the possibility of freedom. If this worked, if Blackwell was truly arrested and charged, she would no longer need to look over her shoulder. She could begin to build a life without fear. A life that, increasingly, she hoped would include Yates Simmons. Cheyenne glowed with lamplight as they entered the town, the streets still busy with evening activity. They made their way directly to the sheriff's office, where deputies waited with final instructions. "Blackwell and his men are dining at the hotel restaurant," one reported. 3 armed guards with him, plus Blackwell himself is known to carry a concealed weapon. Sheriff Madison nodded. "We move in 15 minutes. I want this clean and quiet if possible." As the men checked their weapons and finalized their approach, Yates pulled Lillian aside. "Stay here," he instructed, his eyes intense in the lamplight. "Deputy Collins will remain with you. No matter what you hear, don't leave this office unless Collins says it's safe." Lillian nodded, her throat tight with emotion. On impulse, she reached up and straightened his collar, her fingers lingering briefly. "Be careful," she whispered. He caught her hand, pressing it briefly against his heart. "I will. This ends tonight, Lillian, one way or another." Then he was gone, following Sheriff Madison and the others into the gathering darkness. The wait was excruciating. Lillian paced the small office, jumping at every distant shout or sound. Deputy Collins, a young man barely out of his teens, tried to reassure her, but his own nervousness was evident. Nearly an hour passed with no word. Lillian was about to insist they go check on the situation when the door burst open. Yates stood there, his shirt torn and a fresh bruise forming on his jaw, but his eyes were bright with triumph. "It's done," he announced. "Blackwell is in custody." Lillian sagged with relief, steadying herself against a desk. Was anyone hurt? Nothing serious. One of Blackwell's men tried to draw on the sheriff, but Tom Jenkins disarmed him before he could fire. There was a brief struggle, but we had the numbers. He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. Blackwell himself surrendered once he realized the game was up. The evidence against him was too overwhelming. "Where is he now?" she asked, needing to know. "In a cell," Yates replied with satisfaction. "Sheriff Madison is processing the charges. The prosecutor will be here by morning, and Blackwell will be transferred to Laramie for trial next week." It seemed almost too good to be true. "And it's over, just like that?" Yates's expression softened. "The legal battle may take some time, but yes, Lillian, your part in this is over. Blackwell will face justice for what he's done to you and to others." He squeezed her hands gently. "You're free." Free. The word echoed in her mind like a bell ringing. Free from Theodore Blackwell's shadow, from the fear that had driven her for so long. Free to choose her own path forward. And suddenly, with perfect clarity, she knew what path she wanted. Sheriff Madison entered then, followed by his deputies and the lazy hands who had assisted in the arrest. There were congratulations all around, details shared, plans made for testimonies and evidence to be presented. Through it all, Lillian remained close to Yates, drawing strength from his steady presence. When the time came to face Blackwell officially, to look him in the eye and formally identify him for the record, Yates stood beside her. The man who had tormented her for years sat in his cell, his fine clothes rumpled, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. But his eyes, when they met Lillian's, still held the same cold calculation. "You've made a grave mistake, my dear," he said softly as she identified him to Sheriff Madison. "This changes nothing between us." Lillian stared back at him, no longer cowering. "You're wrong, Theodore. This changes everything. You have no power over me anymore." She glanced at the sheriff. "This man is Theodore Blackwell, and he is guilty of every charge against him." As they left the jailhouse, the night air felt sweet and clean, as if a thunderstorm had passed and cleared away the heaviness. Yates helped Lillian onto her horse, his touch gentle but sure. "Ready to go home?" He asked. Home. The word filled her with warmth. "Yes," she replied. "I'm ready." The ride back to the Lazy S was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. The moon lit their way, casting silver light across the endless prairie. By the time they reached the ranch, most of the hands had retired, though lights still burned in the main house where Martha waited anxiously for news. After assuring the older woman that all was well and Blackwell was safely behind bars, Lillian found herself once again on the back porch with Yates, the stars a canopy above them. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Yates leaned against the railing, his face thoughtful in the moonlight. That depends on you, Lillian. You're truly free now to stay, to go, to build whatever life you choose. And if I choose to stay? She questioned, her heart beating faster. He turned to her, hope and uncertainty mingling in his eyes. Then I would be the happiest man in Wyoming Territory. Lillian took a step closer to him. When I came here, I was broken in ways I couldn't even name. I didn't trust anyone, especially not men. I know, he said softly. I warned you, she continued, that I had been abused by men before. And you said that I would show you better ones exist, he finished for her. I hope I've begun to keep that promise. Lillian smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes and lit her whole face. You have, every day in 1,000 small ways. She reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. You never demanded my trust, you earned it. You never asked for my heart, you showed me it was safe with you. Yates drew in a sharp breath, his fingers tightening around hers. Lillian. I love you, Yates Simmons, she said simply, the words feeling right and true as they left her lips. I didn't think I could ever love again, but you proved me wrong. Joy blazed across his face like sunrise. With infinite gentleness, he drew her into his arms, giving her every chance to pull away. But Lillian stepped willingly into his embrace, tilting her face up to his. I love you, Lillian O'Connor, he whispered against her lips, with everything I am and everything I have. Their first kiss was tender, a promise exchanged beneath the vast Wyoming sky. When they finally parted, Lillian rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Marry me, Yates said softly against her hair. Not today, not tomorrow, whenever you're ready. But say you'll be my wife. Lillian looked up at him, at this man who had shown her what true strength and kindness looked like. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you. They were wed that autumn, when the prairie grasses turned gold and crimson leaves drifted from the cottonwoods along the creek. The ceremony took place at the Lazy S, with Martha weeping happy tears and the ranch hands cleaned up and solemn in their Sunday best. Sheriff Madison stood as Yates's best man, and a young woman who had testified against Blackwell and become Lillian's friend served as her maid of honor. Theodore Blackwell had been convicted on all counts and sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. The news had brought not just relief to Lillian, but a sense of justice for all the women he had harmed. As Lillian and Yates spoke their vows beneath an arch of autumn flowers, she felt the final pieces of her broken heart mend. This was not the ending of her story, she realized, but the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love, respect, and the kind of partnership she had never dared to dream possible. I, Yates, take you, Lillian, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he promised, his voice steady and true. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. As she repeated the sacred words, Lillian's voice rang clear across the gathering. Gone was the frightened woman who had stumbled into Cheyenne months ago. In her place stood a woman who had reclaimed her strength, her dignity, and her capacity for love. The years that followed brought changes to the Lazy S. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, with Lillian's head for business complementing Yates's knowledge of cattle and land. They expanded their holdings, built a new wing onto the house, and earned a reputation for fair dealing throughout the territory. Their greatest joy came 2 years after their wedding, when Lillian gave birth to twins, a boy they named Thomas after Yates's father, and a girl called Caroline for his mother. The children grew strong and happy on the ranch, riding almost before they could walk, learning the ways of the land from their father and the power of words and numbers from their mother. On the 5th anniversary of her arrival at the Lazy S, Lillian stood on the back porch, watching Yates teaching their children how to gently brush a new foal in the nearby corral. The sight filled her heart with such love she could scarcely contain it. Martha, now moved permanently into the main house as the children's beloved grandmother figure, joined her on the porch. "Never seen a man so taken with his children," the older woman observed with a smile. "Nor a woman bloom so beautifully as you have, my dear." Lillian squeezed Martha's weathered hand. "I owe so much to you, to this place." Martha shook her head. "You owe nothing. What you have, you've earned with courage and determination." As if sensing their conversation, Yates looked up from the corral. His smile, when it caught Lillian's gaze, still made her heart skip a beat. He lifted Thomas onto his shoulders while little Caroline danced around them, her blonde curls bouncing in the sunlight. "Papa, look," Caroline called, pointing to the horizon where a distant rider approached. Lillian recognized Sheriff Madison's horse, even at a distance. The lawman, now a frequent visitor and family friend, dismounted in the yard and greeted the children with candy from his pockets before joining the adults on the porch. "Just passing through," he explained, accepting a glass of lemonade from Martha. "Thought you'd want to know Theodore Blackwell died in prison yesterday. Fever took him." The news washed over Lillian like a wave. Not joy, not sorrow, simply a final closing of a door long shut. "Are you all right?" Yates asked quietly, coming to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. Lillian nodded, watching their children now playing with a puppy from the spring litter. "Yes," she said with complete honesty. "I'm free of him in every way now." That evening, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into peaceful quiet, Lillian and Yates sat on their favorite porch bench, wrapped in a quilt against the autumn chill. The stars spread across the Wyoming sky like diamonds scattered on velvet, and the distant howl of a coyote only emphasized the protected comfort of their home. "I used to be afraid of the dark," Lillian confessed, nestled against Yates's side. "Of what might be hiding in it, waiting to hurt me." "And now?" he asked, his arms secure around her shoulders. She smiled, turning her face up to the endless stars. "Now I see the beauty in it, the possibility." She looked at her husband, at the face she had come to know better than her own. "You showed me that, Yates. You showed me that better men exist, that love doesn't have to hurt, that strength can be gentle." "You showed me things too," he replied, brushing a tender kiss against her temple. "Courage in the face of terror, resilience when it would be easier to break. The kind of love that makes a man want to be worthy of it every day of his life." Lillian leaned up and kissed him properly, still marveling after all these years at how safe she felt in his arms, how completely loved. "You remember what you said when we first met?" she asked, her voice soft in the darkness. "When I warned you about my past," Yates nodded, his fingers gently tracing the curve of her cheek. "Then let me show you better ones exist," he quoted. "I hope I've kept that promise." Lillian's smile was answer enough, but she put it into words anyway. "Every day," she whispered against his lips. "Every single day." And as they sat together under the vast Wyoming sky, surrounded by the home and family they had built together, Lillian knew with absolute certainty that some promises were meant to last a lifetime and beyond.